This podcast, Strange, Rare, and Peculiar, is for kind of those in the know about homeopathy, deepening your knowledge, bringing you more information about what you need to know and maybe what you can leave aside about homeopathy.
Homeo what?
Homeo what?
Hey folks,
Here we are.
good morning, good evening.
Let's set the scene on where we are right now.
We're in the hoop.
We're in the hoop house. So if you're not familiar with a hoop house, it's like a greenhouse, but it's sometimes referred to, well, in Europe, in the UK, they call it a polytunnel.
Really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. And it's a growing space. And it's, so here we are, we're in the first week in November on the East Coast, which is typically a really cold, it should be cold by now. But this hoop house is, we've got it heated, and we're sitting here looking at
5 plants of basil, 2 eggplants, and 1,000 winter vegetables.
And a green pepper that, I mean, these summer vegetables are still producing. It's pretty amazing.
Look at this.
That rosemary is beautiful.
Oh my lord.
So we've decided that we've got to experience the sounds of life. Somebody told us that we should be recording our podcast in a closet with all that foam in it. And first of all, we don't have a closet that we could sit in.
Oh, build us one.
You could build us a closet. And second of all, I don't know. We're hoping that the sounds of life that you might hear, maybe an airplane going overhead or the sound of our dog walking around on the pea gravel floor of the greenhouse isn't going to be too disturbing.
There's going to be chirping as well.
Birds chirping.
Yeah, it's when the lawnmower starts up next door. That's going to be a
problem.
Yeah.
That will, we'll honor that. But I just want to say that atmospherically, the smell in here is amazing.
It is amazing.
It's warm. We've got rosemary right next to us, and it just smells so good.
All right, now the cat wants to get in. And so, here's the thing. You've been resistant to this topic, haven't you?
Which topic?
Well, the one we're going to talk about today.
We need to define what it is, and yes.
Well, I mean, for me, the topic would be something like, how did we land here?
Yeah.
You know, the personal story. I think it's a personal story, personal journey, and it's interesting because the comments that I've been seeing are, everyone wants to know. Like, you've been doing homeopathy for 25 years, right? Or more or less. It's 25, right?
It depends on what you count as the start date.
Oh, okay.
Like, what does it mean? I mean, because this is really interesting, right? What does it mean to be doing homeopathy?
Oh, well, that's a different question.
Right, but
But
know.
the point is, you know, you've got longevity in this thing. And so, how did that happen? How did you land here?
Yeah.
One of the things that I found out about you is at one point you wanted to be a nun.
I did. But that's neither here nor there. We could talk about that, I suppose. But the resistance. So it's funny because I have to admit that learning about people's lives is what inspired me to be a homeopath, because the intimacy of the conversation is just so powerful. My favorite genre to read is memoir or historical fiction, because it's about people's experience. I think that's what I love about being a historian, is that you actually start to engage with people's lives in ways that are sort of the insider view. But being on the other side of that is not necessarily my jam.
Well, in that case, I overrule your perception.
I mean, you've already overruled. That's why we're here, and we're going to do it. But I think there's a certain self-consciousness about it.
Okay. Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
I think it's good to. This is because, you know, it's not. Well, I want to tell my story because it's such an interesting story, even though it is, and the same for me. But that's personal stuff. But I think there is something deeply inspirational for some folks that might want to hear, how did you get here? And
Fair
I'm
enough.
interested as well.
Let's start with you. How about that for a good deflection
When I was
move?
7,
Yeah.
I was attacked by a peacock.
That peacock really influenced everything that has happened.
I'll tell you what, it probably did. No. It's just one of the
Well, it
strange
landed on
stories.
your head,
It did.
and now you keep banging your head.
Oh my God.
You were trying to figure out, why do you keep banging your head?
Folks, just for context, I've lost so much bark on the top of my head.
Bark.
because as I'm chopping and digging and building and clearing, I inevitably stand up into something, and for me it is the most horrible sensation. But anyway,
yeah, you concussed yourself just 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago today.
You used a lot of descriptors there that you're hauling and clearing and building and so forth. So I think it's good to give some context of where we are, both physically, our physical location, if we're going to talk about how we got here, because I think we've ended up in a pretty sweet spot.
Well, we're in Philly.
We're in Philadelphia, the birthplace of American homeopathy. Mm-hmm. Pennsylvania would be, but Philadelphia is where it really took off, and I think that was, aside from the fact that I'm from here, I think that was that decision, the decision to end up here, had a lot to do with the fact that this is the place where homeopathy really took hold, and it also gives accessibility to the research materials that I need.
For sure.
But we ended up in a house in an arboretum that is in the city. So we're in the city proper, in 55 acres of preserved space, with about a dozen or so houses, a working farm, a goat project, beekeepers, the Weavers and Dyers Guild, the Philadelphia Orchard Project, the Sustainable Agriculture. It's chock full of initiatives that are geared toward kind of living right for the planet. And it's a quirky place. And we wound up with an acre in this, it's just incredible, with an old stone house built in 1840. And I just think about the fact that this house was built during the time when homeopathy was sort of making its inroads here. And the other thing I wanted to say about where we are is that it's said to be kind of a hot spot. It's on a ley line that is like Sedona. There have been these monks who have lived in these caves or spent time in these caves that are in the woods that are very close to where we live. And I guess if we're, just as we start to engage with this and with stories and with our friends who are homeopaths, we're always talking about, how did we get here? Each one of us who find ourselves committed, not just to be a practitioner, to have a job, but to have sort of given in fully to this work. And most people will say, I didn't find homeopathy, it found me. There's always some story like that. And that's where, from the perspective of where we're sitting now in the hoop house, smelling the incredible verdant earth and all of this, just all this beauty that surrounds us in this, east coast of America, autumn with falling leaves and crisp air and all that, it starts in a really different place for you.
Me?
For you, yeah.
Oh, wow. So if I go backwards, then, living in New York with you in Brooklyn, but the thing that really struck me when you were talking before is it's 2 million miles away from where I was, which is stressed and sitting in coffee shops, cafes, and drinking coffee endlessly.
Artificial energy.
Shots of espresso, which would have been a significant part of my life, say 20 years ago, when I was working in Sydney, in Australia. And then if I go back another, I want you to just go back. Can you go back to the beginning? Because I think that the story of how you may have told it in one of these episodes, but I think you're sort of going from, your university time. Yeah. Well, the bullet points, I suppose, are that I graduated from university as a young man. I'd taken a gap year, you would call it? You call it a gap year?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I took a year off and experienced the world. And I must admit that's kind of important because I'd always felt like living in New Zealand at the bottom of the South Island, looking at the Antarctic ice shelf, that there was a big world, and I wasn't really much of a part of it. And so I graduated, and then I found myself in a really strange situation.
Wait, but your year, though, I think was, you don't have to go into the details, but I think to be that age and to spend a year in Europe, I mean, you went from Greece, you traveled all through Europe on a motorbike that you didn't even know how to ride with, $4 and 3 pairs of underwear and a backpack.
2 pairs of underwear.
2 pairs, right. You had 2 in the backpack, 1 on your bum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I spent a year
Yeah.
away from New Zealand, and I mean, I had adventures.
Yeah.
And it was simply, I mean, it was awful from I remember periods of loneliness and going for weeks without speaking to anyone in English, and probably days without even talking to some folks. So I was traveling by myself.
And barely enough money to subsist. And this is,
a lot of bread.
You ate a lot of bread. I mean, it's just...
Yeah.
But it's really amazing because when we think about it now, I mean, I can send money to my kids,
Okay,
in a second. You were on the edge of risk there without...
Yeah, it didn't feel like it, when you're 20 and you're feeling it for the first time.
Invincible.
Kind of bulletproof until...
But do you think that changes a person, right? So you came back...
Well, travel is critical for me because that has completely changed me. And it's given me, a broader perspective. When you travel, the only conclusion to me is if you're traveling and sitting and being present, then the only conclusion is these people are like me.
Right.
And it doesn't matter where you are.
Yep.
But these people are having, they're doing their lives and they've got their challenges and stresses and I loved it. So I've just sort of said to you, I was miserable. It totally was not. It was amazing. But a lot of it was by myself.
Yeah.
And I remember, having some kind of strong feelings about that. Oh my God, I remember 10 days on Santorini, so in the middle of the Aegean, and not talking to anyone. I think I befriended a dog. Because it's an island, you can basically... I mean, I walked from one end to the other and back in a day. And the dog took me the whole way around. He showed me everything. I was being led by a dog that took me into these amazing churches, and and then eventually to this bar, and it sat outside, and then took me back.
So how does this feed into the homeopathy part? I mean, because
what it feeds in is because I, as a young person, as a teenager, I had lots of symptoms, and my story is I had pretty bad allergic rhinitis, hay fever, and when I got back from that, I think I was quite unsettled, to finish off my third and then my fourth year at university, and I did, and I was academic, and I had found something I was good at, and I was pretty unhappy, I have to say, and ill a lot of the time with just endless exhaustion from sneezing at the end of the day, because you've heard me sneeze.
Oh, please. The people in New Jersey hear you sneeze.
Every now and again I do sneeze. This is not a hay fever sneeze with all the irritation and the irritability, because touch wood, that's all gone. But, I mean, I do pack a punch with a sneeze. And so I was fatigued, tired, cold, and sort of generalised malaise, I think, for quite a long time. And so if we just go a little fast forward, then I'm qualified, couldn't get a job, and I think that was my own sort of...
Qualified, meaning you graduated from university.
Yeah, I got a kick-ass degree from university, and then was unable to sort of do the next part easily, and I found myself ill, and then looking around trying to find my way, and it was suggested that I go and see this crazy woman, and I did, and you know the story, where I was asked a whole lot of ridiculous questions that had nothing to do with my concern. This is my perception at the time as a 23-year-old, 22, and I'd seen a homeopath. I talked to a homeopath. She gave me a remedy, and I've not had hay fever ever again. Not that none of those symptoms, and it was a dramatic, and it came at an amazing time for me, a dramatic improvement in my health status when I was kind of lost, and so I just went, oh, well, that's it, and so that sort of it was a big. I remember when I went, oh, that's what I'm going to do, was lying in that pine forest in Wanaka, and it just went click. And then I wrote to everybody, the Thorkis included, and I settled on Misha and at the School of Homeopathy, and so I did my study there.
Well, you were doing distance learning, and then you moved.
Oh, okay, that's true. I began straight away, within minutes, and then I moved in the in the Bush administration, the first Bush. So and then I lived in the UK. Then I moved to Australia, and then launched into my practice. And
so I just want to go back a little bit, because I think one of the things that I always take away from the story, because we've talked about it so many times and from so many different angles, and of course because we have this conversation, a similar conversation with our friends who, are in people who have sort of been in the game for a really long time, and for whom it becomes everything. There's a part of the story that's always like, I didn't have a choice. It wasn't like I was weighing different options. This thing happened and I pursued it. And through all of these hardships and difficulties, and you try to get away, and you keep coming back. Because I think there's something about sort of I feel like it's an agreement that we make I think in many parts of life, but it's a different agreement to work in business than to work to not just be sort of a healer, or to work in medicine, but to choose a marginalized corner of medicine, which of course now people who are coming into homeopathy, after 2015 are having a completely different experience of it than we would have in the dark ages, where first of all, there was no internet, there was no Googling to find all the homeopathy schools. You had to work for it, or to get a book. You didn't go to Amazon. Amazon was still just a forest. Just a forest. But you know what I mean? Or a warrior woman, right? But it didn't have the connotation now where you just dial up and you get a bunch of books delivered to your house. You had to seek it out. There was and so I wonder, because a lot of us who wind up in this position also have these stories of solitude, conscious or unconscious introspection. There's like some preparation that goes on. I mean, am I being too sort of...
No, not at all. Because what I realised I was doing is kind of going, and then I went there, and then I went there. But I mean, what I found in my early days of homeopathy study was I found sense in the world. Yeah. And a lot, the sound of your Saab door closing. Do you know that sound?
Of course I know that sound.
See, I had an old Merc in the 90s. An old Mercedes.
And a Saab, the car, not sobbing, but the car that they don't make anymore.
I know.
But that car is my spirit animal.
No, that's not true. We know it's not true. But what I'm saying is the sound of my Mercedes door shutting is that sense that I got when I read the Organon for the first time, started to comprehend it, read it again.
Was that the first book that you read?
No, I remember the first book I read. It's a book, we don't have it in our library. I don't even know if you can get it. It's called The Faces of Homeopathy. No,
that's Julian's book.
I just said Julian's book. That's interesting. It's Two Faces of Homeopathy, I think it's called.
I've never even heard of it.
And it's a critique of homeopathy by a bunch of physicians, I think. That was the first book I read.
Oh, wow. And where did you get it? How did you acquire
it? From the Dunedin Public Library.
It was in the library?
Yeah.
Wow.
Back in the 1980s, listening to not very good Joan Armatrading albums. So, there's me in the South. Where were you when you heard the ding-dong?
yeah, so, my journey was really different. And because you assumed you were going to practice.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I had to. There was no doubt. The thing for me was that a part of my study was I have to find a place. I have to find... And my experience of being unemployable, and even though I was probably extremely employable, I felt unemployable. I was rejected for 74 job applications.
Wow.
Yeah, with a first-class honours degree in history.
Wow.
And that was a tough time.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
See, because I kind of had the opposite experience.
So we were talking New Zealand in the 80s, which is actually probably America in the 50s.
I mean, close. Yeah. From the TV channels.
Funny.
But I came at it from just a completely different place. And it's funny because you talk about growing up at the ass end of the earth, as you've referred to it, and how isolated it was. But, I might have grown up in, 3 miles from the 5th largest city in the United States. But I probably had less exposure to the broader world than you did. I was raised in an immigrant Italian, family, and they chose not to really assimilate. I mean, I grew up with my grandparents' generation, who only partially assimilated, and to the point where they referred to the Medigans, the Americans. They were like these other people, and it's like they were at that point they were Americans, but there was a way in which I wasn't expected to do anything. I mean, I'm exaggerating here, but kind of ran away from home to go to college. The older people, my grandparents' generation, they couldn't fathom that was appropriate for me. And I was a nerdy bookworm, and they really didn't want that to happen. And see, it's hard to tell stories without being personal, but my mom had died just a couple of years before that. So I was literally living with the older generation. And I don't think they wanted me to basically leave that enclave, and I sort of escaped, which sounds so dramatic, but in a way, I was only 17, and I moved to New York to go to university because I could, and I figured it out somehow, and I didn't make any choices. Like, you chose to study history. I sort of turned up at the only school that was still accepting students at the last minute. I went to the City University of New York. Only one of the colleges was still enrolling, so I went to that one. It turned out to be a business school, so I studied business. I mean, it's just so random.
It is random.
And...
But what gets me is the age and the place. So you were in New York in
1983.
83.
Yeah. And I was a dancer, and I was studying business, which it was just... I always thought of it as being sort of ridiculous. It never really spoke to me. And I found, it's only when you think retrospectively of how you are guided somewhere. So I wound up choosing a major. I chose marketing. And the things I was most interested in was research, marketing research, and consumer behavior.
Yeah.
And I've always been a writer. And so a lot of the courses that I did were about writing. And so it's funny because it's like the same. It's what I needed to learn, chosen randomly, but it's actually been really helpful because consumer behavior, it's just human behavior. It's just in the marketing realm, they want to know how you make people buy stuff. My concern was, why do people do stuff, right? But, I graduated, and I felt like I needed to be sort of successful. And all of my friends, again, because it's the 80s, all my friends from business school, because at that time you could do a 5-year program and get an MBA. It was like the early days of the MBA, and the school, they used the Harvard model of case studies. I mean, it was really fun, but all of my friends got into finance, and there was so much money at that point, in the early 80s, and with our giant shoulder pads, but we were getting driven around in limousines. I mean,
you had big hair,
I've had giant hair my entire life, but I'm Italian American. What can I say? But and everybody was really into drugs. That was never my scene. I just, I was still a book nerd. But I found that whole time to be gross. It's like, okay, in the beginning it's really fun. You get going in limousines to these clubs that now you see in movies and, getting to go see all these bands. I mean, it was definitely fun. But I didn't have the same excitement that my friends did.
Even when you were going crazy at CBGB's watching the
Clash.
Clash.
Yeah, I mean, I loved that part. I loved living in New York in the 80s, for sure. It was wild and kind of scary. I mean...
Yeah, it was different, huh?
I got mugged, I got robbed, I mean, all those things. But I didn't care about the work. And I kept trying to find ways, in business. Like, it's really easy to make a lot of money if you don't care, I think. Like, not being invested in it.
Yeah.
So I just didn't want it. And I found that I would spend money because it was there, and that's not me. So I then started to figure out how to get out of it. But I didn't even know you could get out of it. Like, I was too young when I got into it to know how to get out of it. And what happened for me that got me to homeopathy was I realized I could leave New York. And I realized that what I loved was the quiet of nature. And the first time I went to Vermont, which would have been like in 1987 or 88, I knew I had to leave. I had to get out of New York. And it became a plot to get out of New York to do something else. And what I realized I was really interested in was human behavior. And it actually goes back to... something that my dad said when I was really young, when my mom got sick. So she had MS and terrible. Like, I mean, that's sort of a focus of my practice. Like, duh, of course, we do the things that, we couldn't change when we were kids. But in all the cases I've seen, I have never seen anything like what happened to my mom. She was ravaged. I mean, she was diagnosed at age 23. And was paralyzed not paralyzed, but sort of incapacitated, no speech, no, nothing by the time she was 30, and dead by 37. So, but here's the thing. My dad said he knew something was going on with her before she was diagnosed. Of course, in the 60s, they weren't diagnosing like they do now, but he said she changed. She wasn't herself. And that just that's homeopathy. But of course, I didn't know that. But that phrase stuck with me. And so when I was deciding I'm going to make this giant life change, I decided I wanted to study clinical psych research to sort of figure out this thing about the mind and the body. Like, how are they not one thing? And again, this is I moved to Vermont ultimately in 1992, but I would have started this exploration in 1989, right when I started doing pottery. That's funny, those two things go together.
Yeah.
I never really thought about that. Anyway, but clinical psych research, that was it. And then I get to Vermont and I'm supposed to, start this PhD program and I meet this person who's a psychologist who's like, you crazy. Do you actually think you're going to be able to ask that question?
I'm so glad you met that person, because I would have said to you at the same time, wait, it's all rats and mice. It's all lab stuff, electrodes and...
Yes.
Yeah.
How long would I have lasted? The first time they'd show me the mouse, I'm out. I could never. I can't even think about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, but this person said, do you know about homeopathy? I'd never heard of it. And... that was it. And then I had to go find a book. And I remember going to a place that had a beaded curtain. You had to walk through a beaded curtain to get to the book section where they had all the weird stuff.
Whoa.
Incense burning and all kinds of stuff.
I miss those stores.
I love those stores. There's still one in Philly. We can go. You've been there.
Downtown.
Island of Letters on South Street.
Okay.
Anyway, but I got Kent's lectures on philosophy.
You're kidding. That was your first book?
That was my first book.
Wow.
And so when you ask about when did I really start in homeopathy, I mean, it was, I don't know, when do you start? Do you start then? Or then I did distance learning like you did, and I needed human connection. Then I was, going to a school in New York, and it just wasn't enough. And then, I started over 3 times, and then ultimately, ended up in Minnesota. But I mean, the journey. It's sort of, when does it start? It's like there's a point at which it just totally changes you.
I think that see, I'm so far away from that. I like hearing you. What I meant was that point. You know, it's kind of like, I don't remember what I did yesterday.
I can vouch for
and
that.
that's 34 years ago.
Yeah.
So I struggle to access that, but I think it's really important that, you know, in our profession we mostly have, you know, 80% female students, female-bodied students. So so I think it's much more important that the students hear your story, because in a way I think that mine is sort of driven by a lot of things that would drive most young male
Right, you
behaviour.
wanted to find a job.
Well, I had to find a place,
Yeah.
Yeah.
See,
And then I was selfish, and then just worked and worked and worked. When I got to Australia, you know, in the early days, I set up a practice in England, and then I left, and then moved to Sydney, and I again landed with $237, not a lot of money, and so I had to make it work. There was no choice. I had to make it work, and so I was probably living in Sydney for 10 years before I had a weekend off. You know, and I said yes every time, was available all the time, and I'll just say that and then leave it, because it's much more important that people hear your story.
Yeah, except that I did that as well, but I did it secondarily.
Right. So how did you do it? Because you also had two gorgeous kids you were bringing up.
Yeah, so there are two parts to it, and that really. So I'm going to go backwards from the same point that you were in, which is I had to make it work because, you know, I became a single parent when my kids were young. And, you know, you had $247. I maybe had $250.
Yeah, but your dollars were US dollars.
Exactly, fair enough. And it was the same kind of thing. But you know, and I worked every weekend. I got up at 4:30 in the morning for, I can't even say how many years.
Were you studying? Was that for studying? Yeah.
For studying, but also then, you know, I took every case that I could. I was traveling. You know, at one point, I was traveling. I was living in New York, and I would drive to Philadelphia one day a week for my practice. I would go to Los Angeles, where I had a group of clients. I would go to the Poconos, which is like the mountains between Pennsylvania and New York. I had a group of clients I would see there. I would go once a month. I would, you know, that was before you could do online consultations. So I would go wherever, and I would teach wherever. I would drive and teach, and I would just I'd get on a plane, and I was really lucky that my dad was, you know, lived really close to me in New York and could, you know, stay with my kids when I was traveling to teach.
See, that's my story as well.
Yeah.
Because I realized that, you know, if I'm gonna earn a living, get ahead, I gotta say yes.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever said no.
Can't.
Not no to a lecture, no to traveling to a lecture, to give lectures. Didn't matter what the money was or wasn't. And then when it came to clients, if it was a Friday night at 8 o'clock, then I just went, okay, well, that's when I'm working. And it sounds like it was pretty similar.
I mean, it was, but the other thing, though, because I think it is really different when you're raising a family, is, you know, I mean, that almost broke me. That was really hard to give my all in different places. And, you know, I'm really lucky that I have the kids that I do, because I think they knew it had to be done, but we grabbed every minute that we could. I mean, I can't even count up how many acute calls I did from my car in the parking lot at a soccer game before I had, you know, a laptop. And I would bring my, you know, my repertory. I had a synthesis that I kept in my car, and I had Morrison's Red Book. I have two of them because one of them lived in my car. So that I would, oh my gosh, the Rubbermaid bin, when you saw how I used to travel with my client files, and you were appalled. So no,
I wasn't appalled, I was amazed.
Okay.
Actually, and I think I've not said something. There was one summer in Sydney where I was in between clinics, offices, and nothing really happens in Australia from kind of mid-December through to actually end of January, because it's Australia Day, or it was. So there's kind of 6 weeks. It's the big summer holiday. And so I was finishing one clinic, and then I knew I was going to be beginning January over somewhere else. So I did house calls.
Mm-hmm.
Rode around in Sydney in my big Merc. By the way, the big Merc was 30 years old and falling apart.
and how many
beautiful.
miles to a liter
But
of
my
gas?
car got broken into. That she got broken into, and that was just the one thing, because I'm going, client records,
right?
That, and it actually that actually was a big deal for me. I suddenly realised, I've got to be more serious about this.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I mean, I worked 2 summers in Vermont.
You did, in the cabin?
And, I lived in a 2-sided cabin, and it was so my kids could go to the summer camp. So I kind of, I worked so that they could be at the place where they needed to be. So I worked a full-time job there, and there was no, we were off the grid, so I would drive to where I could get cell phone service, and I had my Rubbermaid bin with all my active client files, and I would sit in the back of my SUV. I would open the hatch, and I would sit there and I would do my calls, sitting in the back, and...
I'll tell you another story.
Yes.
So, I got this opportunity to go to Sri Lanka. I don't even know when it was, maybe 2006 or something. And I was there, and I'm going to be there for about 10 days. And I went, this is impossible. Because the other thing about being a jobbing practitioner is you can't stop. Holidays are...
Right.
Are you kidding me? So you got to take your clients with you, unless, I don't know. I chose not to. And this guy who ran this place said, I don't tell anyone this, but just for you, if you walk about 1.5 miles over there, see the sign, climb up, and if you stand on a rock, on that big rock, with your mobile phone above your head, you'll get service.
That was like Vermont in the years when I was there.
Exactly.
Same thing.
And I mean, God knows how long those calls and texts, how expensive they were. But so that's so interesting. I love because there's commitment in both of our stories, and there's also a drivenness as well.
Yeah.
And do you see that with these folks that we're dealing with?
100%. But can I say something else? Is that there have been so many times where people helped me. And this is really important for me. I think you're talking about drivenness, and as soon as you said that, I realized what my driver, though, is when I got scared, because being a homeopath can be scary, for all kinds of reasons. But I think for me, it was... people always say, is it legal in my state? Is it this? Is it that? I was sort of beyond that. It was, can I support my family?
Yeah.
Right? Is this going to be something that sustains me? And there were 3 times where I was at that edge, and something magical happened where someone helped me in my practice. And the way that I envision it is that in order to climb, rarely do you climb on your own. It's usually somebody gets down on all fours and lets you stand on their back. And I think you then have a commitment to do that for somebody else.
What were the 3 times?
Yeah, the 3 times were when I was in Minneapolis, and I got to join this practice that was, at the time, I mean, I don't know how many really, busy group practices there have been in the United States over the years.
That's the busiest practice I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was, Val Ohanian and Eric Summerman had a clinic at that time called Homeopathic Practitioners Limited, HPL. And to be asked to join that practice was beyond anything I could imagine. So I stepped into just full-time practice. Because at the time I was still doing freelance work, to support what I was doing. So I was writing.
Marketing work. Right.
Well, I was writing. I was doing business consulting and writing, and I would get up at 4:30 in the morning, and I would try to make a living so that I could sustain being a homeopath. And then, and then I was asked to join that practice, and then that became a way for me to let go of everything. And then, fast forward, I don't know how many years later, my dear friend Tina Quirk.
Tina.
My Tina was, settling her practice down a bit, and I took on, lots of her clients, and then with that, I was able to locum for Jeremy Scher, which, and then it just becomes like, just an opportunity, like when people trust your work. Like, to me, those are I don't know, I almost could cry just thinking about it, because at those moments, it was like this, you want to do this as a job. You need to do it as a job. It needs to, it's got to support you. And sometimes it's hard, for whatever reason. And so, these infusions into my practice were just magical. And I think it's amazing right now, like this project that we're working on, we've been trying, we've got sort of within the school, we've built this infrastructure with the school and with Homeopathy Help Now and with the foundation of ways to sort of, any student or new practitioner, they don't even have to be new, but people who are sort of qualified to do the work and who are willing to just really buckle down and do it, I feel so committed to finding a place for them. Like, no one should have the desire to do hard work in homeopathy and not have a place to do it.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, now, one of the things that's just, it feels really incredibly like a cycle, is being able to create this mentorship thing that we're doing with we're trying to think of the name. Maybe we should get a vote. What are the URLs that we have?
I've bought Homeopathy Collective
Yeah.
and Homeopathy Collaborative.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to weigh in, Homeopathy Collective or Homeopathy Collaborative? I sort of like collaborative now that I'm saying it out loud, but I'll be curious if anybody else cares. But working on an apprentice model, and Molly Erlinger and I are working together. She graduated a couple years ago from our program. She's amazing. And we're trying to figure out how we can do this sort of at scale to support other practitioners, because we're realizing that, you can train people to do the job, and, we set people off with, all their clients from supervision and everything. But I think as we're talking about this now and reflecting on it, like, there have been times where I've just needed an infusion in my practice. Like, there's so many people who need really high quality homeopathy care, and this is a way that we can sort of keep that going, but also just make sure that the quality of care is there. Anyway, I'm sort of digressing, but that it just feels really important, and I think that was. I
don't think you're digressing at all, because if there's a couple of really important things that you've said along the way, but that last one was really interesting because I wasn't expecting it. So the generosity of others, but the infusion at times, and I it'd be good to talk further to other jobbing practitioners.
Yeah.
Along the way.
Well, and we will be doing that. We're going to be doing some interviews on the podcast coming up. We've got some people. Well, let's not talk about who, because we've got to set it all up.
That's our secret.
It is. Although the first one will probably be. Now let's just keep. We'll talk about it. Anyway. Is there anything else, though, about, because, the journey, are there any other things that, okay, I guess the reason I'm saying this is because you were asking a question that I answered somewhat differently, but about sort of the people coming into homeopathy now, and what are the ways in which, are people coming in with the same sort of drive or the same whatever, and I think so.
You do?
I do, but here's the thing that I'm thinking about is like, so we've just spent a lot of time talking about sort of what it meant to do homeopathy as your job, and sort of what it takes to do that. And I mean, like I said before, I never thought I would be a clinician. I just thought I would write about it or research.
When you began?
When I began, I never, I didn't have expectation to practice, because in all honesty, I felt like that it should be medical doctors. I didn't understand how. I mean, once I saw sort of clinic, once I saw it really happening by non-medical providers, I was okay with it, because I was trained in the beginning by some amazing people. I mean, when I was studying in New York, they would have these, I think they called them master clinics or something, but in my earliest years of study, people like Jeremy Scher were coming to New York to do clinic, and my first exposures to clinical training really were
Was
watching.
Val or Eric licensed?
Mm-mm.
No.
No.
Professional homeopaths.
They were both professional.
I tell you what, let's just talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Because I'd been around in homeopathy and I'd never heard of the Minnesota school, and I'd never heard of Val or Eric. And I felt like, I've kind of got a decent map of what's going on. And then I read a book about homeopathy research based on a conference that was in Minnesota, maybe 2007.
Uh-huh.
And then I went, who are these people?
Yeah.
And then your stories of...
They were amazing.
Of the carts full of notes and the conga line of...
Yeah, that
clients.
clinic was unbelievable. I learned so much. I mean, the gratitude is sort of bottomless.
Yeah.
For me, and I think part of how I was able to get HHN to really think about it was from working there and, being the low gal on the totem pole and doing other people's acutes and what that's like.
There's a bunch of humility that's required in there as well. The other thing which, when I'm hearing your story, I really like that you're kind of saying that there was a degree of flow, or you followed the energy.
Yeah.
You were not going, no, it's...
Okay, wait. I followed the energy, but I also tried to get out of its way a couple times, and it didn't work. That's
That's a really good point.
Because, fear, I think fear is a huge motivator, and there is no fear like the fear of a single mother in New York City, who is freelance. And really, I mean, and especially, and I think for me, having been monetarily successful in the past, it's like, okay, wait a second, I guess maybe I didn't connect those dots here, but what do you do when you're really weighing sort of the I could easily sort of sell my soul and work in these fields that are just about making money, but I didn't have the heart for it. I never did. I had the skills, but not the heart. I had the heart for homeopathy, but it also was, it was a lot. So there was there were 2 points when I tried to escape. And like you're sending out 72 resumes for jobs.
I mean, what's that saying?
Well, the same thing happened to me in 2011. And I thought, okay, well, what I can do is just, earn on the side, get some consulting gigs, which I did one, but I tried to just get like a job, and I thought, well, I'll just do homeopathy on the side. Nothing, no responses, not like zilch, zero.
Yeah.
And that's when things, I got an infusion back into my homeopathy world. I also was, I think I had a hot minute of, I can't travel and teach anymore. I think that actually, if I'm really honest about it with myself, that's what it was I was afraid about how much time I was having to sort of, I like wanted a 9 to 5. But anyway, it wasn't for me.
9 to 5.
Talk about the flow, right? So you can say I went with the flow, or you could say that the flow just took me and I couldn't. And then the other thing was in Minnesota, when I was spending all this time doing the consulting gigs, and I thought, well, maybe, I should just do that. I sent out my portfolio. So back, this was a long time ago, before you would just have an e-portfolio. And I had these 2 beautiful linen books that were my writing portfolios. And I sent them out. I had 2 of them because they were huge to make. And one of them got sent to a company that then folded and it disappeared, and the other one got lost in FedEx.
You're kidding.
Did I never tell you that? My 2 portfolio.
Your portfolio.
Yes. So go with the flow. I mean,
damn.
Yeah, flow got me. Yeah. So the people, so just to, because I know this is too long of a podcast, nobody's listening by now. So
Are you kidding? We're just getting going.
I know, but we have to get going. But talking about the people who are coming into homeopathy, so we've emphasized so much about sort of what our journey was, but I don't think that's the only journey. And I think
totally.
Right? Because there are so many of these amazing, I'm going to say young women, and that's not to leave behind all the other people, but I'm thinking about what it takes for some of these young moms, or, moms with kids at home. I'm specifically thinking of, homeschooling families. Like there are, and I might be talking about the moms who are doing the school doing the study. But, most of the time there's a partner who's supporting that. So, I'm talking through the lens of the person studying to be a homeopath, but the entire family, is a part of this. And there is no less of a commitment, and just because, our calling was to sort of be in it, 20 hours a day, it doesn't mean that there's any less, I don't know, passion or contribution to the field from people who aren't doing it in fully.
I totally agree.
Right? Every person who's in it and their heart is in it and they're really committed, whether they see 5 clients a week or 50, whether they're teaching around the world and writing books or whether they're just taking care of their community, who's to say we can't have, thousands of people doing, half-time work is just as good as having hundreds of people, doing all the work.
I think just on that, if I get where you're going with it, one of the questions you asked before was, what is full-time practice? And is that necessary? And I think the answer is no. No. It's about from the perspective of the practitioner. It is when you're on, you're on. When you're working, you're working. And if it's 5 clients a week, then that's fantastic work.
Yeah. One of my kids was here last night and said, "Are you on call?" And then he looked at me and he's like, "Never mind, you're always on call." As we were going for a walk and I forgot my phone, which is so unusual, and I panicked. I'm on call supervising the HHN, my pod from teaching clinic this week, and I was away from my phone for the better part of an hour, which is...
That would be absolutely horrific if you lost your phone. You would freak out, wouldn't you?
Please don't even talk about it.
You would go straight to the Apple Store.
Yeah. Yeah, of course I would. Yeah.
That's a level of
you could
compulsion.
You don't know where your phone is for days, but yeah.
It's right here in this jacket pocket.
Did you ever have a beeper?
No.
I did.
No, you're kidding.
No, we've never talked about that. Anyway, that's a story for another day.
Technology that we had for a hot second.
I had a beeper for a long time.
I would like to do that podcast with you because I've had some... we need to do it with Jerry Goy.
What, about technology?
Yeah, because he was my technology consultant for about a decade.
And your man bag consultant. So he heavily influences
the technology has got to fit in the man bag. I mean,
course.
there was a whole science to that.
Yeah, totally.
But I never had a beeper.
I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what did it do?
It beeped, and it gave me a phone number to call, and I'd go to a payphone. Actually, I can remember being in the pottery studio and having my beeper, and it would beep, and I would clean up, and I'd go down to the payphone and make a call. I mean, this before cell phones.
And this was because, someone was ringing you and just...
It was my consulting work. Okay. So I guess we're seeing my pathology extends before homeopathy. All right. This was fun. I didn't want to do this one, and it's always weird to, I don't know. In my mind, nobody is listening because while I care about every single personal story, I can't imagine somebody wanting to know mine. But yours, I never get tired of. So maybe that'll do.
That's hilarious.
Window into my soul.
We're going to leave it there, folks.
Right.
All right. Hey, take it easy. See ya.
We'll do it again.
Bye.